Good afternoon and welcome to Beyond the Lens, the show where we turn the lens around and project behind the scenes of how your favourite TV shows are made. I'm Nick Field and today we're going to be discussing perhaps the most important piece of equipment of all. After all, without it, we couldn't be talking to you right now. I'm talking about the camera. Have you ever wondered what it takes to produce a TV show? How many cameras are used? 1, 2, 3 or maybe even more? Well, today I'm going to be joined by some industry veterans who will help educate us about the wonders of the TV camera and how you actually go about using them in the studio. However, before we get into that, one thing we can't ignore is all the other people that help make the show happen and who are all around me right now. To tell us more about the people that help bring a show to life, today we have with us someone who has worked as a floor manager at the BBC for the past 6 years. Gabe Ratai, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me in Beyond the Lens. I'm, thrilled to be here.
And we're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, Gabe, you've been working, as we say, as a floor manager for the last 6 years. So, how did you originally get into that?
Well, I kind of worked my way up. I was originally a runner, and then I slowly took on more jobs, more responsibility until, someone I'd worked with before asked me if I wanted to try being a floor manager. And, that kind of evolved into staying with that position for 6 years. Something I really enjoy.
Excellent. Well, floor manager, it's one of these things that people see on the credits of TV shows, and they're probably sitting thinking, what on earth does a floor manager do? You're not just like managing a floor, but of course there's a lot more to it than that, isn't there?
I'm definitely not telling it to stand up. But no, there's quite a lot to it. I'm, the mouthpiece of the director really on a TV show, so I make sure that everyone is in time. I make sure that the director's vision is really, being put through. That, the equipment is in working order, especially, and that the presenters have their cues, the guests have their cues, the audience has their cues if it's a live show that we're doing. I make sure everything's in time, everything's managed, and, just really put the whole thing together.
Indeed, because lots of people think that the director is someone who sort of like sits around and wanders around on set, but that's not the case on TV, is it?
No, he definitely doesn't have his fancy director chair, next
Definitely
to
not,
the
no.
camera. Not like you see in movies about, films and stuff. It's a lot different, actually. I'm really, much more on the set than he would be. The director really trusts me to make sure that everyone knows what they're doing. And is able to take more of a step back, really.
Excellent, good stuff. Now, we're talking a lot about camera operators today. So tell us about your relationship with people behind the camera.
Well, so I have to make sure that, as I mentioned a few times, the equipment is in working order, that no lens cups stuck on. It's the little things that you might forget.
Indeed.
I make sure everything's, everything's connected up, everything's, working fine. All of the colors are matched up on the different cameras. The lighting looks fine. It's all the little things. I make sure that people who are in charge of them, are really on top of them. Really, I just kind of, make sure everything's, all put together.
And of course, we've got lots of different people wandering around set. Of course, you've got your sound people, and you've also got your auto cue operators, which I think a lot of people might not be familiar with, but very important to us presenters. So tell us a bit about your relationship with auto cue operators.
Well, so as a lot of people actually might not know, the auto cue that is on reflected onto a piece of glass in front of a camera lens for the presenters. Actually, the presenters really can't control the speed themselves because that is, as you might know, a disaster. They end up tripping over at their own tempo. And so an auto cue operator comes in and scrolls through the text at the speed that it needs to be scrolled through at. Because, you don't want it too slow and you don't want it to kind of drag on, but you also don't want it too fast where the presenter can't keep up. So you need to have it at a really good pace where it feels natural.
Indeed, yes. And presenters never operate auto cue themselves.
Never.
That is
Don't let
disaster waiting to happen. So what's your advice for someone who would be looking to get into the industry, perhaps as a floor manager?
Honestly, just, pick up any opportunities you might get. Really kind of try to look more into the role, try to watch floor managers at work, because I think that's managing so many people, I think that's a skill you really kind of need to learn yourself, but, obviously take any opportunity you can get, really.
Indeed. Do you prefer kind of like the atmosphere of the big sets or the intimacy of the small sets?
Definitely the smaller sets, because people are actually listening to you. Because when you have a big set, there's a lot of people that might, there's a lot of people to manage. And when you're managing too many people, you inevitably forget one or two things. With a smaller set, you don't have as much flexibility with what you can do, but you definitely know that everything is going to be taken care of.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Gabe. That's really fascinating. Some really fascinating insights that you've been telling us about there. And thank you so much for your time. Now be going for a short break, but after the break, we'll be joined by a leading local cinematographer. So whatever you do, don't go anywhere. See you in a bit. Welcome back to Beyond the Lens. Now before the break we were finding out about the team that makes the magic happen in the studio. People like Jamie here.
Christ's sake. Eddie, please.
Eddie, sorry. Now, you might be looking at the camera that Eddie's operating here and thinking to yourself, what on earth are all these buttons for? And what on earth are all these wires for? Well, we can tell you that every button and every wire has a specific function and a specific role in making the TV experience that we all enjoy. This video from Andy Lewis here at 01 Studio tells you more.
Hi, welcome to the studio here at 01. Today we're going to look at the Ursa Blackmagic Broadcast. It's sort of our mainstay camera here. We have a look at how it's connected and how it speaks to and gets the signal through to the mixing desk, and then we'll have a look at how it gets back from there onto the studio monitor. So first thing we need to do is turn the power on. So the power switch is here and that fires up the system. Here is the power cable. And what we have here are the two feeds. We have two SDIs in and out, and that's the way that the camera communicates with the desk. If you follow these cables down, they go into what we call a snake, a bit like an umbilical cord. And the snake then goes back to the back of the studio and is connected here to the power, and then here is where the SDIs go in and out. So once the signal comes from the camera to the desk, it then comes back into the studio monitor here so that we know what is going live. really for the floor manager's use. So we have the desk here, the camera switcher, and the monitor here. You can see there's we have 4 feeds there. Cameras 1, 2, 3, and 4. We only have camera 3 switched on, which is the camera you saw just now. The top 2 windows are the preview window on the left and the broadcast live window on the right. And you can see that if I switch out, I can preview the camera here, and then with the red buttons I can decide which feed is live. And if I go along to camera 3, you can see I get camera 3, and that's how it gets onto the monitor.
Many thanks to Andy Lewis for making that video for us and telling us all about how cameras interact with each other, something which I certainly wasn't aware of. Were you aware of that, Eddie?
Of course I was, of course.
Oh yes, of course. You only work with them all day, every day. Well, as mentioned, our topic today is cameras. And of course, we can't talk about the present day cameras and ways of operating without firstly talking about what used to happen in the not so dim and distant past. In some studios today, cameras are mounted on cranes and are operated with a remote control. They no longer require a person to physically operate them. But it's not always been that way. In previous generations, where remote control was impossible or inaccessible, regardless of the dangers or inconveniences of a particular shoot, an operator would be required to be looking through the lens at all times. Here with me in the studio to explain modern day camera operations and how they've improved our ways of working is a leading cinematographer from Here at 01 Studio, Eric Moore. Eric, welcome to the studio.
Hi, thanks.
So Eric, it's fair to say that you've been in the industry for a long time.
Yeah.
So I mean, how long are we going back here?
25 years.
25 years. And how did you get into it originally?
I came to it through teaching. I got a job, and then I started showing kids how to use cameras, and actually didn't know much about cameras at the time then. I was more into multimedia, and I come from a sound background, so I'm a sound person. But I've always been quite visual. I did animation, I did other sorts of things as well. So I've always been a visual person. So I found it really interesting to see what happens when you film things rather than just have still images or whatever. It's an interesting thing. Yeah, learning how to tell a story with a camera.
Definitely. I mean, I remember my parents having this giant thing that they would take like movie film with on kind of like actual reels of film and things like that. But you know, they didn't even have sound back then.
No, it would have been Super 8 or Standard 8 probably if it was before the 60s. I think Super 8 came in like 64, I think. So and you could get sound, but it was difficult. And if you've got those cameras now, there's no way of playing it back. The sound you can play, you can get the pictures off it, but you're stuck. You can't listen to the sound.
Exactly. Yes. So when you first started out in the industry, I suppose it was all analog filming at the time, wasn't it?
Totally.
Can you remember when you first heard about digital, or when you first saw one in action?
Yeah, the first time I saw a digital stills camera was on a shoot where they were using it instead of a Polaroid, basically. It was made by Kodak, amazingly. Yeah, and it was quite expensive. I think it was about 5,000 quid for a 1 megapixel camera that gave you a little image that was, grainy, but it was instant, and they could take 100 pictures or something for very little cost. So compared to a Polaroid, they just wanted to visualize what was happening in front of the lens. So they could, but obviously they've got to go, when they take the still shots with their big medium format camera, they've got to then take the film away and get it developed. With this, it's instant. So it was amazing. But everyone's going, no, it's never going to replace. Digital's never going to replace real film. Never, but it has, obviously. Yeah.
Indeed, it's something that's really grown, perhaps in maybe the last 15 years or so, and of course the thing with digital cameras is they don't use film like the old ones did, but rather they use a sensor. So tell us about how that sensor works.
Well, the sensor just gathers light through the lens. It's the same as, instead of the film being there, you've now got a sensor, and obviously with the film you print onto a chemical. There's a chemical process, and you end up with the actual picture on the celluloid, which is great because whatever you take, as long as you do it properly, whatever you've got will stay there and will be perfect. With digital, it's information. It's changing that light information into digital information, which you can then edit, which you can change. And as cameras get more advanced, there's more information being gathered, so you can do more stuff with, in fact, more information now from a digital camera than you get on a film camera. So you've got much more latitude, what they call latitude, between bright and white and black. There's a lot more information being recorded, so you can change things incredibly. Indeed, and of course now, digital cameras are being used to make kind of like all kinds of programs, aren't they? Yeah. It's everywhere now. It's even in low-end TV. The cameras we're using here today, 4K cameras, they would have been hideously expensive. Not 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have been at, £50,000 for a camera. Now it's £5,000. So it's incredible, very affordable. Anyone can make a film now. You can make a film with your iPhone. So the Tangerine, the feature film, a few years ago won an Oscar, I think, shot entirely on an iPhone. Everything apart from the sound, which had a proper sound crew. But yeah, anyone can make a film. All you need is imagination and a script. Indeed. Well, and before we go, what's one bit of advice that you would give to someone looking to get into cinematography? I'd hang out with people who are making films. Yeah, there's loads of people out there who want to make short films, music videos. They just want to mess and do stuff and be inventive. And just hang out with them and see how they work, because you're going to meet people and learn stuff, and it's fun. Brilliant. It's really good fun. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Eric. I know that you're going to be heading off to do some filming in Tenerife soon, so the very best of luck to you with that as well. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. Well, that's it for Beyond the Lens today. Thank you so much to my guests, Eric, Andy and Gabe. And thank you all for watching. Be sure to join us again soon, where once again, we're going behind the lens. Goodbye.